Good morning, everyone. It'll be just a moment. We'll get started. Good morning, everyone. Almost time. We'll wait just another moment. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Good morning. I'm Sunnyvale Mayor Larry Klein. Thanks for joining me again this week. Happy New Year. We all made it to 2021, so I hope everyone had a good holiday break. This is the 43rd installment of my weekly virtual office hour address. And people continue to say they appreciate these weekly live stream addresses and hearing from their mayor. So I'll continue to do it during shelter in place. This Facebook live stream event is really good because it allows me to give you some updates, answer some of your questions, and also just provide some general words of encouragement. So thank you for allowing me to continue to represent you and work for Sunnyvale during these ever-changing times. I hope everyone's doing well, staying healthy. Please remember, take care of yourself, both mentally and physically. This it continues to be a difficult time. It's the fatigue of staying at home. The weather, it's cold out there, but at least it's sunny. And hearing it looks like it's going to be dry for, looks like the majority of January. So hopefully you're getting outside and getting a little exercise. But we are definitely starting to see another surge in cases from gatherings during the holiday break. So keep following the county health order. Do your part to stop the spread of the virus. Continue to wash your hands, don't touch your face. Reduce the number of people that you just come in contact with. Maintain a safe social distance, and of course, wear your mask. It's mandatory. It helps. If you need a face covering, contact me. I think everybody has at least one face covering at this point, but it does make a difference. And of course, get your flu shot if you haven't done that already. We continue to see those surging cases, and if you may meet somebody that has the virus and not is being asymptomatic, not showing any symptoms, or you could be asymptomatic, and the mask is your best defense and your best prevention to make sure that you're not spreading it to someone else. We are now 298 days after the March 16th county health order started the shelter in place in an attempt to slow the spread of COVID-19. Almost over 300 days. And since that declaration, a lot's happened. A lot happens every day. I have daily press conferences to watch, seminars to attend, conferences, conference calls to basically confer and advocate on your behalf. A lot of people are watching TV this week for multiple reasons, and that I ended up fitting in several other conference calls and press conferences in the middle of everything else. So let's go ahead and talk about what's happened at the federal, state, county, and city level over the last week or so. Um, Last Monday, Governor Newsom basically covered the standard fare of ICU capacity. Per region is way down, and at that point, the Bay Area was at 9%. Um, Greater Sacramento was at 16. Northern California was almost near 30, but San Joaquin Valley in Southern California was at 0%. So, you know, that projected stay-at-home orders were extended for Southern California's San Joaquin Valley last week. The Santa Clara County, or Santa Clara, sorry, the regional Bay Area uh, shelter-in-place restrictions are supposed to expire today, but definitely we think that they will be extended. Looking at the case counts, looking at the ICU numbers, you know, the state was also it was also reported the state was sending additional assistance to LA County to basically help with their hospitals with load leveling. You know, for how many beds are available in different hospitals and trying to manage that a lot better. That greater cooperation and coordination among all the hospitals is critical. And then the governor talked about, you know, the Moderna vaccine was arriving later last week, and then we should have had about 1.7 million doses available by the end of the year. And I know that there's been some issues with distributing those, but they're working on that, very closely. And then there was a pharmacy partnership with CVS and Walgreens, looking forward to when where there's going to be wider distribution of the vaccine. And the existing hospital staff are inundated with to deal with current issues, whether or not that's testing or dealing with patients. And the governor was looking at ways, and the state is looking at ways to get the vaccine to everyone who needs it and wants it as quickly as possible. And of course, we're still in phase 1A, where it's healthcare workers, frontline responders are the main people, but soon we'll be moving into phase 1B, where it's people over 75, education workers, child care, food, agriculture workers, and then different tiers of people over 65 with underlying conditions, people in transportation, all the different things that it'll be a while before the general population should be able to receive it. Last Wednesday, Governor Newsom met with Dr. Fauci, and Dr. Fauci thought that would be, approximately April, when it'd be for wider distribution to anyone who needs it. So we'll hopefully see that go forward, and the number of vaccinations rapidly go up as we get into the springtime. So, and then on that same day, Governor Newsom also had a second, on that Wednesday, the Governor Newsom also had a second press conference, and it was basically to unveil his $2 billion package for incentives for California school districts to reopen classrooms. And so this has been an ongoing goal that we want. A lot of parents want to get their kids back into classrooms. There are a good number of people that ultimately think that remote distance until everyone's been vaccinated is exactly remote learning is what they want their kids to do. And so it's those balance and trying to reach that balance, but without additional funding to the schools for all the additional measures that need to be put in place for in-person learning, it's impossible. And so ultimately, the governor put forth a package, and that will be part of the upcoming budget, and that budget will be released today. And we'll talk a little bit about other things that will be part of that budget that he announced earlier this week. But the package boosts spending for testing at schools, and also just It doesn't mandate testing, but it gives additional funding for testing, for additional measures, plexiglass at, the check-in points, and, additional masks and disposable masks and all that. So, parents can still opt for to continue distance learning if they want, but and definitely not every school will reopen in the spring, or in the next month or so. The governor was shooting for starting to do those reopenings in February, and he's gotten a lot of pushbacks from different cities and school boards around the state. So we'll see how that goes. And then it was a pretty quiet weekend, being the New Year's weekend, and so the final big holiday of the year, or the end, or the first big holiday of this year at least. And so on Tuesday night we had a council meeting, our first council meeting of the year, and it was mainly a lot of ceremony. It was recognition of the outgoing vice mayor and council member. So Vice Mayor Nancy Smith and Councilmember Goldman. It was recognition of the new district council members. So our three district council members were basically honored, and then it was recognition, of course, that for myself, the first directly elected mayor, and there was swearing in and a few speeches by everyone. So and it was good to hear some of the electeds from the state and from the federal representatives come and speak, and so from that standpoint, it was good to kind of celebrate the peaceful transition of power from our old council to our new council. So that was good. We also selected our new vice mayor for the year, and that's usually the person with most seniority that hasn't done it before, and so. Councilmember Hendricks is my new vice mayor. So he was former mayor for the city, and so he will be vice mayor for 2021. And then we appointed council members to all their intergovernmental assignments. And so that's besides being on council and dealing with council meetings several times a month, doing outreach within the community, being liaisons to our boards and commissions. We also have a lot of intergovernmental responsibilities, like the Caltrain Board, Cities Association of Santa Clara County, Valley Water, BTA. All those are kind of representing our city in other organizations, and providing appropriate response and voting as far as that's concerned. And then finally, on Tuesday night, we chose the seating arrangements up on the dais. Hopefully sometime in 2021 we'll be actually doing in-person meetings again and be back on the dais, but for now we at least chose where people will sit when that comes to pass. And then on Wednesday this week, most of us were watching TV all day for what was happening in Washington, D.C., and it was pretty horrifying to a certain degree. How the protest became an insurrection and breaking into the Capitol. The senators and congressmen having to basically shelter. I was in contact with several of our representatives and making sure that they're safe, and asking if there's anything that I can do locally. But it was a very difficult day to watch. Finally, things were the presidential election was certified. There was a curfew in D.C., and now we're trying to figure out what went wrong for this protest. But yeah, definitely, it was hard to watch. But I think a lot of us were glued to the TV all day long. There was at least a press conference. Governor Newsom revealed a little bit about the proposed state budget that will finally be released today. And so, part of that budget will be $4.5 billion stimulus program. I think he was calling it the Golden Gate Stimulus to help small business. So that's a variety of grants and tax incentives. But in order for this to really take place quickly, and really make a difference, it will require our state legislators to approve something that would take effect, you know, in the first part of 2021. You know, our budget is normally approved the end of June for our fiscal year starting in July. So that's from a state standpoint. That's also from a city standpoint. So the governor also proposed, $600 for low-income California residents that make less than $35,000 a year. So, and Newsom's goal was hopefully to get those checks to go out in February or March. Aiding families who've lost their jobs and earn very little money and are struggling amidst this pandemic. And so that definitely requires, our state legislature to approve some bills to put on his desk. And just to kind of give a perspective on where we stand from a state standpoint, in November, the Legislative Analyst Office estimated that the state budget would probably see one-time $26 billion surplus in 2021 because revenues had come in higher than expected during the pandemic. And so that gives the governor and our state legislators some leeway to provide additional support locally in order to pay stimulus. So whether or not that's business or residents, the federal $600 stimulus checks were approved about a week and a half ago and signed by the president. And those were for people that with adjusted gross income of $75,000 or lower in 2019. And so that's going out. I think it's already been deposited directly into some people's checking accounts, but those checks are going out in the next week or two, and they've already started going out. So hopefully, what the governor's trying to do is say, we need to utilize some of the surplus from last year, and apply it as quickly as possible to help businesses, to help residents in a very difficult time. And also the governor was talking about extending the eviction moratorium. So the eviction moratorium was set to expire, I think the end of January. So the end of January, they were set to expire, and part of that is the governor wants to extend that to a later date so that people, and also give people enough money so that if they're having problems paying their rent, they will actually be able to put some of that money towards that back rent. And so we'll see how quickly the legislator takes action on this. But from a governor's standpoint, he will see the full view of the current state budget, at least his first proposal. And it always takes several proposals before we actually see what the final numbers are look like. But today we should see at least that first kind of shot across the bow of what the budget looks like. And then let's see, on Wednesday, Santa Clara County health officials also had a press conference, and they shared a very sobering picture of Silicon Valley's ambulance system kind of crumbling under the pressures of the pandemic, what our ICU beds look like. It's just our healthcare system is inundated with patients right now. And this also just isn't just our healthcare system, but our 911 system, and it's impacting a lot of the operations within the county. So we have less beds available to transition people from ambulances into the emergency room. And so what that has also meant is, from an ambulance service standpoint, often they are just waiting in the parking lot, waiting for hospitals to have beds available. So this is the issue that we have right now. Wait times can be anywhere between 30 minutes to up to 8 hours for ambulance service. So if you have an emergency, definitely think about whether or not it's an emergency. And that's one of the things that they were saying is, I think more than half of the emergency calls that ambulance go to specific locations end up being canceled. So from that standpoint, it's like only call 911 if it really is an emergency, and from a health standpoint, that's a big thing. Is there's a health thing. If you don't feel well and you have someone who can take you to the hospital, or you can go on your own, that's much more important than calling 911. And definitely our health, from a health standpoint, there our county health is really worried that January could get a lot worse. The effects of holiday travel and gathering, we are just starting to see those. So it could be a lot worse from that standpoint. And making sure that if you're, hopefully you didn't go to gatherings over the holidays, but other people that you might be coming in contact with might have. And so making sure that you're safe is critical, at the end of the day. And as far as the Bay Area stay-at-home order, it's scheduled to end today. That was 3 weeks from when we dropped below 15% ICU availability. But we think that, and the county health thinks that should be extended. Most likely it'll be extended indefinitely. California is also, so that should come out later today. California should also be issuing a new travel advisory. The residents should avoid traveling no more than 120 miles from their home, except for essential reasons. And those returning to the state are being required to quarantine for 10 days, just to make sure that they don't have symptoms, they don't have COVID-19, or don't start exhibiting symptoms while they're quarantining. So it's been a difficult week. So I hope everyone is staying well, trying to sleep well. I've heard a lot of issues as far as that's concerned, and it's difficult, but definitely we'll get through this, and things will come back to normal. Now let's go ahead and get to the health dashboard on testing and hospitalizations from a national standpoint. We have over 21 million cases. That's up about 1.5 million cases just in the last week. So that's again, another 1.5 million about every week now. And from California standpoint, we've reached 2.6 million cases, and we've passed 28,000 deaths. So, it's pretty scary. ICU bed availability is on an average less than 1% around the state, and that varies from region to region. Our county is about 8%, and around the Bay Area, I think we're about 5%. So it's things are really difficult, and things are actually looking worse as we see those numbers continue to go up. From our county standpoint, the total cases within our county are now above 76,000. That's up 9,000 just from a week ago. So we've actually seen, even in the surge, we're seeing, as the governor keeps saying, a surge on top of a surge. So we moved up to about 7,500 a week, and now we're up to about 9,000 a week. So it has really been very difficult. From the number of deaths just within the county, we've had 673 deaths. That's up another 40 just in the last week. So it's the number of cases, the number of deaths, and of course, from a hospitalization standpoint, we currently have 815 people that are hospitalized because of COVID-19. That's up 712 from last week. So, those numbers continue to grow around the county, around the state, around the nation. So, hopefully, everyone is being safe as much as possible. From a city-by-city standpoint, San Jose continues to have the most. They're above, 50,000 cases, and that's up more than 6,500 from just last week. And so they've been having, it went from 4,000 to 5,000 and now 6,000, above 6,000 a week. So San Jose is very large. And Sunnyvale's also had a little bit of an increase. We're now at 3,400 cases. That's up about 500 since last week. And we had been tracking about 350 to 400 a week before that. So definitely, it's a difficult time, but your actions do make a difference. I continue to do a lot of advocating on your behalf, at the county level, continuing to have those discussions with our supervisors, making sure that we're trying to be prepared as possible to deal with the vaccines as they come in, making sure that our first responders, that our healthcare workers, that people in healthcare facilities are getting vaccinated as quickly as possible, and making sure appropriate information is being disseminated within our community. The county health pop-up van for testing will be back here again on Monday. So it's here on the second and fourth Mondays of every month. So it'll be here, on Monday the 11th, and then back on Monday the 25th of January. And it's here from 9:30 to 4 p.m. So all you need to do is go to sccfreetest.org, and you can go and you can basically reserve a time slot if they're full, or if you want to get a test sooner. sccfreetest.org also gives other places around the county where you can also get tested. El Camino Hospital is doing testing, Planned Parenthood in Mountain View, the county fairgrounds. So there's lots of locations around the county where you can get tested. And let me go ahead and talk about some upcoming events. On Monday, the Planning Commission meets, and normally I don't talk about the Planning Commission meetings, but one of the projects that they'll be talking about is the next portion, a portion of Phase 2 of our downtown, and it's the second half. So it's Block 3, and Block 3 is Redwood Square, Macy's, that big open area, that small parking lot. So that's Block 3, and the south end of that, so including Redwood Square and kind of separating that block into two halves, is a proposal for a 12-story mixed-use development that will include 479 units and approximately 30,000 square feet of ground floor retail and restaurant space. And then, of course, there'll also be underground parking, so there'll be 2 levels of underground parking below that area for all those tenants. And it's a mixture of those units. It's a mixture of studios, junior 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, and 3 bedrooms. So mainly small 1 bedrooms and junior 1 bedrooms make up the majority of that project. And then some studios, some the 2 bedrooms, 3 bedrooms, and so that basically only goes to Planning Commission unless it's appealed or council calls it up to council. So ultimately part of what was approved with the downtown specific plan in, I think it was about September of last year, August or September, was the agreement between the downtown and the city on a kind of a certain amount of numbers as we finished our EIR, as parking requirements, all of that, and giving them a certain amount of height allotment as far as that's concerned. So this is part of that first defined project, and so there's it's basically the Macy's building would be split into a certain amount of retail and office space above, and then housing and retail on the bottom and housing above. And so that's how that whole Block 3 around Redwood Square, and keeping and maintaining Redwood Square is an important portion of that. So the other and then so that's the Planning Commission. If you want to attend that, definitely go and you can attend that meeting. It starts at 7 p.m. and you can. I think there's two items. So the first one is a single-family household issue, and then the second one, of course, is the larger project on the downtown. And then on Tuesday night, council sees multiple items, and chief among these are, as a consideration for Related California to basically amend Block 15. And so Block 15 is at Iowa and Matilda, and so that's and it's city-owned land. But one of the things that we've been working on is having one of the different nonprofit developers build affordable housing there. And so this is a request from Related California, and so that's what this development is to basically do two things. For one of which is share some of the work product with Google, so Google would help fund some of the preparations for that land, some of the designs, making sure that that project goes forward as well as possible. And then it also secures a $1 million loan, so it approves one of the loans that Related California, the developer, has actually been able to get, and so it's making sure that approving that deed restriction, and so that's part of one of the things that we'll be looking at. Another one of the things that we'll be dealing with is the year-end budget for 2019-2020, and it took a while for us to kind of go through all that, but it's that comprehensive annual financial report. We actually have an outside agency that reviews what we do from a budgetary standpoint and what our financials are, and they were delayed because of COVID-19 and because so many cities had issues in trying to do their year-end financials. So we're finally basically the council, Sunnyvale Council is also the Sunnyvale Financing Authority, and so we end up kind of approving what happens with the surplus. The biggest decisions we make are what we do with the surplus from last year, and then we had a higher estimated revenue and lower estimated expenditures ultimately, and so we had about $9.4 million, and so there are several proposals that staff has come up with, one of which is a $1.5 million forgivable loan to Sunnyvale Community Services to help them for their building build out. So one of the things that they're in the process of doing, and Sunnyvale Community Services does a lot of good in our community. They were one of the main people that dealt with. We gave them funding early in the pandemic. The very first night, March 17th, we basically gave them funding for rental assistance, for food assistance, for utility assistance, for anyone who needs it, for all those qualifying people. And so, they provide food continuously during the pandemic, and they've had to change what their standard operations were. They gave backpacks to school, and normally a backpack program to kids, which turned into kind of a remote learning assistance program. So they do a lot of good in our community. And so one of the things that they haven't been able to fundraise as well as they could during shelter in place, and so one of the things that they're doing, one of the proposals that staff put forward is $1.5 million forgivable loan to SCS to help finish their building build out, and then whatever reconstructions needed there to basically facilitate their transfer to that new facility as quickly as possible. And the other things are $2.5 million for our pension trust, and so this is basically looking at our long-term pension liability and making sure that we pay that down as quickly as possible. And then that's pretty much it as far as upcoming events. There's another meeting later this month, and one of the big things that we have scheduled for the last Thursday of this month, January 28th, is our yearly strategic session. And so this is an all-day meeting, and you'll hear more about that later, but this is an all-day meeting where council gets to sit down and get updates on certain updates on where the city stands. It's our last chance to propose new study issues, and then also, it's a good way for council to talk about, kind of general priorities and how we would like, you know, setting different priorities from a city standpoint going forward. And so this is, I think, to me, it's one of the most beneficial meetings that we have every year, because it allows council a little more flexibility to not just talk about a specific topic, but talk about in general, the direction for the city and what we would like to see. So this is it's to me, it's one of the most rewarding things that we do from a council standpoint every year. And let's go ahead and get to weekly questions. What's happening with the Macy's building? And so they're doing some final cleanup as far as utilities around the Macy's building, getting ready for the actual demolition. And we talked a little bit about those proposals. So additional housing and additional office space. So the additional office space would be along Washington, and then additional housing would be kind of an inverted L or flipped L design around Redwood Square. So those are some of the from an operational standpoint, things that will be upcoming from our downtown. Let's see if I have any other questions. Is what's happening with the open space in downtown. So Redwood Square, the majority of that will be maintained. One of the northernmost tree, which is kind of separate, so there's kind of a grove of several, and then there's one separate tree. The proposal is for that tree to be removed. That was approved by the historical commission, or the heritage commission last month, or maybe it was November. And there's a new tree that we planted in its place, and there'll be new plaques, kind of what those trees represented, that was approved as part of that plan. But the majority of Redwood Square, except for maybe the very kind of northernmost portion of that, will be retained. So I think it basically cuts across where the current parking lot ends. So that mini parking lot of 50 spaces, that would be kind of the northernmost edge as far as that's concerned. So I haven't, it's been a while since I looked through the designs, and I know that the new, what's being seen in the Planning Commission on Monday goes into more detail as far as that's concerned. So I do encourage people to take a look at those designs. I only took a quick glance at them, but definitely, if you have comments, attend the Planning Commission meeting on Monday and give them your feedback. So we'll see how that goes. Let's see. Please use part of the surplus to assist the Fair Oaks Park residents to find safe space. So for hotel rooms. So one of the things that we've been looking at, and just to kind of give everyone an update. So we've had ongoing questions, and I've answered lots of emails on this topic. But one of the things that we've been doing is looking at renovating, and last year we approved the renovation of Fair Oaks Park to change the fields, to make a Magical Bridge all-access playground. Right now there's a group of unhoused residents there, and we've been working with Sunnyvale Community Services and Downtown Streets team and the county to try to find them places for permanent shelter, whether or not that's a shelter or transitional housing. That's been something that we've been working on for a while now. That has been postponed for a little bit, and that was we've already been talking about putting a portion of the city funds into helping that transfer, but it's a mixture of county resources that we just can't put people into hotel rooms. You need the appropriate services, you need to make sure everything is going smoothly. So, and there's a whole issue with what happens to their items and putting their items in storage. There's a whole series of things I've had with discussions with Sunnyvale Community Services about. And so right now, because of COVID-19, county doesn't have that bandwidth, and so we're looking at other service organizations that will be able to take that on at the end of the day. And let's see, what's next? Any other questions? Yeah, will Redwood Square be survive or be wiped out by development? And no, Redwood Square does maintain, that's the kind of the beauty of an agreement. So and this is always the question of when we talk about the state, basically streamlining the development from the chances of so one of the things that multiple housing bills from a state standpoint try to do is they try to basically allow, or at the end of the day, what they try to do is say, okay, developer, making it easier to build housing. And a lot of cities don't do well about building housing, and a lot of that's zoning. But at the end of the day, cities aren't the ones that actually build the housing. Developers do, whether or not that's a nonprofit developer building affordable housing or a market rate developer. And cities only zone for that. And what the state is trying to do is saying, for those cities that drag their feet in the approval process, it really there's other things that could be done. And so but one of the things that we do as a good city is we negotiate with those developers to make sure that there's a community benefit in everything that they do. So the negotiated agreement with the downtown developer basically said, oh, if you're going to add additional housing, you want additional office space here, you want to reduce a certain portion of the retail, making sure that you still have retail along, the initial plan for the project had second floor retail, which doesn't show to do well in a lot of places. But if you want some of these other incentives, then you have to make sure that there's a park. And so this is the negotiation that goes on between cities and developers. Just much like the AMD project, the AMD campus adding 1,100 housing units, but it's also giving us a 6.5 acre park. So that's kind of the give and take as far as all these developments are concerned. And this is one of the reasons why I'm always, kind of fighting with our state legislators to say, it's a lot of the housing issues are issues of funding. We have lots of affordable housing and housing that could be produced within our city, but like the related California project on Block 15 at Iowa and Matilda, it's having funding issues. It has to get funding issues from the federal, from the city, from the state, and trying to get all this for long-term funding for services and other operations on that site takes a lot of efforts, and so that's one of the reasons why we don't get as much affordable housing, especially missing middle income housing that's really needed. So anyway, let's see. Other questions? And as far as the height, the 12-story high building downtown, it's about 40 feet taller than the buildings right next to it, and there are definitely some items or some parts of that proposal where you can see from an architectural drawings what the shading is, what it really looks like, and from a certain standpoint, it's making sure that there's appropriate step backs, and it doesn't seem to be too let's say looming at the end of the day. But you really want kind of a stepwise development as much as possible within your city. And the other thing is, as opposed to office space, when you're talking about condos and apartments, the floor height, basically the ceiling height, floor height is a lot lower than when you're talking about offices. So ultimately we'll see what the Planning Commission says as far as Monday's meeting is concerned. Let's see, other questions. I have a concern about people speeding through my residential area. I would I love Ponderosa Park and walk there, walk the park daily. People are driving way over the speed limit and barely stopping at stop signs. So this is always an ongoing issue. From a neighborhood standpoint, there are things that you can do to get your neighbors together to basically request traffic calming, and there's a whole application process that you need to get neighbors to sign basically a petition saying we want our traffic calming studied, and from that standpoint, looking at then traffic monitors are put up, conceivably temporary traffic measures or monitoring measures, whether or not that's flashing signs, whether or not that's here's your speed, or whether or not it's actual speed bumps, or something of that nature. There are lots of things that can be done to slow people down. Flashing lights and crosswalks to make sure that people stop at a crosswalk. There's all kinds of those measures, but I'll respond to your comment on here's where you can go to actually get that done. And so from that standpoint, making sure that if you want a specific area evaluated for traffic calming, there's a whole process from a city standpoint that you can go through in order to get that done. I think that's all the questions that I have. It's getting close to 10 o'clock, and I'm trying to shoot for a little bit shorter meetings this year, unless there's lots of information. So let's go ahead and wrap up. Thanks for joining me again this week. As always, I'm proud of Sunnyvale's response to the pandemic. Life continues to be difficult. New issues come up every week, but your actions and your response do make a difference. And so, of course, wear your mask, get a flu shot, help your neighbors, share baked goods, and do whatever you can to build community during these difficult times. I'm proud of Sunnyvale residents that are pulling together to help their neighbors, delivering food, putting free things out in front of their house. There was a whole thing over the holidays of people doing handmade ornaments that they were making available to their neighbors. So if you're out on a walk, wave, say hello to a stranger, of course from a safe social distance, but people really miss that social interaction. Sunnyvale will emerge from this as a stronger community. We're in this together, and we'll get through this together. Thanks for listening again, and until next week, stay safe. Have a good week. See you. Bye.